It is. Let's talk money, power, politics. And of course, let's talk about Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, an acronym that just so happens to spell DOGE, a cryptocurrency linked to Musk, Dogecoin. It sure seems like that $130 million he spent to help Trump get reelected was worth every damn penny. Here to talk about it, Ron Insana, CNBC senior analyst and the CEO of iFi AI, and Cardiff Garcia, editorial director for the Economic Innovation Group and a former economics journalist at the Financial Times and NPR. Okay, so first of all, it's the Department of Government Efficiency, and they've got two guys running it, yes. Vivek and Elon. That doesn't sound so efficient.
Well, we don't even know if it's not going to be an office of the government either. From what we've read thus far this evening, it's not going to be inside the government. And so that eliminates any concerns about them having to divest their personal holdings and any of the businesses they run. Dogecoin, by the way, just as an aside, is up 20% tonight on this news. Shocking that it makes absolutely no sense at all.
Just because they're going to say it's not going to be an official part of the government, both of these men have conflicts of interest or have investigations or have massive contracts with the U.S. government, and they will be in a position to cut programs, cut jobs, cut budgets, and at the very least, see where all the money is getting spent. So even if they're not officially inside the government, it feels like a conflict, no? Oh,
absolutely, 100%. But the question, too, is, I mean, they're talking, at least Elon Musk in recent weeks was talking about cutting $2 trillion from the federal budget. Now, of that, $900 billion or so is non-defense discretionary spending. Everything that the government can spend money on discretion in a discretionary fashion, but excludes interest on the debt, defense, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all the things that are mandatory spending items that account for roughly 86% of the federal
interest
budget.
On our debt, one of the biggest expenses we have in this country, and it's only going to grow.
Yeah. So you can default if you want, but that's a whole other set of problems if that's the way you want to get out of paying that particular item.
But isn't part of the key issue here, though, that we don't actually know if they're going to be in a position to do anything, right? In a position to cut anything? We don't know what kind of teeth this thing's going to actually have, right? We know that the White House has listened to these guys so far. Excuse me, Donald Trump has listened to these guys so far. But the Department of Government Efficiency isn't like an actual thing.
It could be Infrastructure Week number 11.
It could be. It could be nothing. By the way, it
could be a concept of a plan.
Yeah, the nicest, most charitable spin on something like this is that if it is paid attention to and if it is taken seriously, right? I'm not saying it will be, but if it is, it's not a terrible idea to have something like this that looks for inefficiencies in the government, right?
There are tons of people in this country that desperately want us to cut government spending, that want somebody on the outside to look at it because they feel like the government is so inefficient and fat. That's a fair gripe.
We did this from 2008 to 2010 with the Simpson-Bowles Commission, which was an extraordinarily well done, well thought out attempt to right-size government spending, adjust entitlement programs, audit the defense budget, invest in infrastructure and education. This was put out in 2010 after the great financial crisis. Neither President Obama nor then Speaker Ryan accepted it, and so it died on the vine. You can dust it off right now, update it for current deficits and debts, and it would be still a very wise and thoughtful plan.
Yeah, right, Simpson-Bowles was a sort of a nice idea at exactly the wrong time, back when unemployment was still pretty high, inflation was still very low. Now we kind of have the opposite situation.
All right, well, then let's talk about inflation, because inflation, the cost of living, that's essentially what got us here, right? The election happened last week, and people in this country are frustrated, mad about the economic status quo. You analyzed voter data and found that places that shifted towards Trump the most were densely populated urban areas. What can you tell us?
The most densely populated and the most expensive urban areas. All right. It's one of the strongest correlations we found, and not just us. This data has been spliced by a lot of people at this point. And it seems like a few things could be going on, right? Here's where we kind of enter the realm of speculation a little bit. One is that people in these places are just super dissatisfied with what they're getting. A lot of those places are run by Democratic mayors, Democratic governors, and they're throwing out the incumbents just like the rest of the country did, right?
And the rest of the world, for that matter.
And the rest of the world, for that matter, right? And if you think about what happens in a place that's already very expensive, and then you look at the inflationary spike we had a couple of years ago, it means that the sticker shock you get in those places is even higher than in the rest of the country. housing is a particular problem. And this is consistent with something else we've been seeing, which is that young families, families with young children, have been fleeing the biggest, most expensive places.
But that's also COVID.
But it's been happening since well beyond the peak era of COVID. In New York City by itself, the population of children under 5 is down almost 20%. And the people who've stayed behind, maybe because they can't leave, are registering their frustration at the ballot box.
By the same token, people have moved back to Manhattan, and rents are actually higher than they were prior to the pandemic for a wide variety of reasons. New York, Manhattan in particular, has its got its own unique
characteristics. But not those young families.
Yeah, but not young families who have to put their kids through private school and find a place to live. But when we hear data like this and this analysis, right, for the last week we've been saying people could not afford to make ends meet. They couldn't afford their rent. They couldn't afford insurance. So they said enough is enough. But it's also much more affluent people who could afford it, but they're saying, I am not happy with this. It is not fair how I'm having to live.
Yeah, and this lived experience thing, it rankles me to the extent that as I travel around the country, I do not see an empty airplane. I do not see an empty restaurant. And it doesn't matter.
It doesn't mean that people aren't going to those places. It means they're pissed about how much they're having to spend there.
Well, yes, but they're still spending. That's the crazy part. So if you were really upset, if you grew up in the 70s and 80s, as I did, and your parents were really struggling to make ends meet because inflation was 13%, unemployment was 11%, and you were waiting in gasoline lines in 1979 for 2.5 hours, that was a wildly different experience. Things aren't that bad.
Okay, I just met Ron, so I'm sorry to disagree with them already. One quick statistic.
No,
median household income, is still lower than it was in 2019. Please.
The stock market has surged after Trump's election. That captured all of the headlines in the last week. But what we really need to keep an eye on is the bond market. I told you this on election night, and I really want you to pay attention because right now, the bond market is showing where trouble is, and it is really brewing. Yes, investors are excited about deregulation. They're excited about tax cuts. But those bond market traders see inflation ramping back up over the next 2 years. And soon, Donald Trump is going to need to pony up some serious answers about his economic policies because all the ones we have seen so far seem incredibly inflationary. We're talking about a labor shortage from mass deportations, potential trade war over tariffs, and Donald Trump has given us zero specifics on how to handle it. I promise I'm coming back to you. Are we going to start paying attention to this? Because right now it's like deregulation, stock market's booming. What this is going to do to deficits, what this could do to the bond market, then it could be game over.
So here's where I want to just caution everybody not to overinterpret the moves we've seen in the last week. Here's why. It's true that everything Donald Trump is suggesting he's going to do is consistent with higher rates, right? Worries about more deficit spending, worries about inflationary policies. But at the same time, we don't usually associate a steepening yield curve with bad news necessarily. It really could be that there's some real growth expectations in there as well, possibly because of tax policies. If you're going to do something that's going to boost the deficit, it might also boost growth. So that is how I would sort of advise some caution on how we interpret these movements.
So my personal preference is to follow for predictions about the economic future, the bond market far more closely than the stock market. It's once been famously said that the stock market predicted 11 of the last 5 recessions or things like that. The bond market's a very good predictor of future inflation and future troubles in the economy. So if we were to see rates go up considerably from here, I would start to worry about the very